What's up, Moto Buddies? Mike here from Taco Moto Co. We are just finishing up the video on this bike over here. This is the full Taco Moto Ultimate Dream build. We've got bike number 2. This one has the skin off, the plastics are off. I thought we'd give you a view of what's happening underneath so you can get a better understanding of some of the links that we go through in preparation and setup on these bikes. Up here on the front, I want to point out a couple of things regarding the turn signal flasher indicator. That's this little green bulb right here. So this, when we convert out to LED turn signals, like with our fork wraps, we need to convert that bulb, and we use a little indicator harness, and that's this little thing right here. And what I wanted to point out is the fact that there is a grounding wire, comes here off of the side of the reg rack, and then what we do is we like to route it up the side and then put a little zip tie here to wire manage that so it doesn't end up being loose and snagging out here on the outside. If you have one of these and you have a spare loose broken off brown wire, or you just have a little eye terminal here that's broken and nothing connected to it, that's what happened. Yours broke. So a real simple fix is to just secure it like this and run it up so it's not in the way and it won't get snagged. Just pointing that out. Nothing really going on up here to indicate as far as anything other than on all of these connectors we use EXC-F 50, so that's a water dispersant and anti-corrosion spray, and so we use that on all the open Molex connectors. Here's one, here's one. There's quite a few of them on these bikes. All bikes have them, the Asian bikes, the European bikes. There's no such thing as a motorcycle that doesn't have some sort of open connector somewhere, and so we just waterproof those. We even do all the sealed ones. We have videos where we talk about that, and that's just all preventative maintenance for corrosion. Electrical system maintenance is a real thing, and we do that from 0 hour mark. Pointing out the mirror perch, we looked at that on the other bike, but just giving you a better view of how it clears the throttle cable. Coming down on this side, let's point out this. I forgot to mention this yesterday, the Moto-minded Bomber bar switch. That provides a really rugged 2-button setup instead of having the stock multi-button switch, which can be a little fussy. And the gray start button, we've seen those snap and break off pretty often, and so this is much more reliable and cleaner as well. Takes up less bar space. Also, I want to point out these stops here, these steering stops. These are prone to come loose on you, and so if you're doing new bike prep or just your routine maintenance, you want to make sure these are tight, and then we throw Loctite on those as well. Oh, pointing out this. So this was that charcoal canister that's part of the vapor system. This right now is a great that we don't have those in stock right now. They've been back ordered for a long time, but KTM Hard Parts makes a really good insert that is a coolant reservoir catch bottle. How those work is they come off of this hose here. You put a new hose on and it'll route around, and then the coolant will go and be stored inside of the frame and then will be pulled back in. The KTM OEM situation doesn't have a coolant reservoir bottle, and it's a really good idea. We just didn't have those in stock to put it on, so when we get this bike back for a check in the near future, just to do an evaluation on it, just to look it over again for them, we will throw that in at that time. The other thing that you can't see here, there's something inside of the engine. We put in our Taco Moto billet oil pump gears, and those replace the stock plastic, nylon composite plastic gears, and that's a huge upgrade and a reliability measure that is an important item. We take off the spark plug boot. On these 350s, 250s and 350s, the spark plug is buried way down here into the head, and there's a very long, let's see if we can point to it. Yeah, it's this gray spark plug boot right here. So what we do is we pull that out when everything's fresh and new, and we put silicone grease on the top of the spark plug where it inserts into the boot, and then on the boot where it contacts the cylinder head at the top. And the reason is that as this gets some hours on it and a little bit of there's dust and some debris that's going to get down in there, and it will, through heat cycles, it could cement itself to the spark plug. And we've seen plenty of times where someone is trying to get their boot out, and then they'll maybe use a pry bar, or what they'll end up doing is they'll crack the insulator on the spark plug. The spark plug, it's long, the boot goes down along to get the plug, and that's ceramic. Well, that's not ceramic. It's sort of a plastic composite material, and that'll crack, and that will cause spark leakage, and then misfires and all kinds of erratic running behavior that people will chase their tails trying to find. So to eliminate all that and to make this as easy to remove on day 1 as it is on year 5, we do that as preventative maintenance. Again, we talked about all the open connectors on the KTMs and all motorcycles really, and so EXC-F on all those electrical connectors is part of that setup procedure. Up here on top we have the ECU, that's the Get ECU system, and we set this up, we calibrate it, we do all the settings to make sure the idle and TPS are set correctly, so that's ready to go for them. Here is something to point out. This is a little, let me pull this up and I'll show you one other thing. This right here is just a little end-of-line dongle that does not connect to anything. It doesn't need to be connected to anything. That's just a KTM item that sits down in there. Don't do anything with that. But this is a little dongle that then basically tells the wire loom if there is a key on this bike or not, and these little jumpers perform that function. This is a source of a lot of headache and bike breakdowns. With the electrical problems, you've got a couple wires in here that are hot at all times, and so putting your EXC-F anti-corrosion spray in that is a really good, solid preventative maintenance item. And we've talked about this all the time too, but this connector here, this goes to the start-stop switch. Here it is there. You see this white Molex connector. You absolutely want to prevent corrosion on that, and inspect that from time to time as well. Just pull the connector off in the back and see if there's any corrosion on there. Lots of no crank, no start problems with that. So ECU up there. We have a starting capacitor, so it's very puzzling, but the enduro bikes do not come with a starting capacitor, but yet the competition bikes do. Very strange. So what this does is it allows a little holdover electricity to charge the ECU and the fuel injector when you are either push starting or kick starting. This bike doesn't have a kickstarter, not equipped, but on bikes that are, or you're push starting a bike, if the battery is completely dead, let's say you absolutely left it on and it's fully dead overnight, the key, and so just a quick abbreviation on that. So on the 20 plus bikes, if you leave the key turned to the on position, it's a nice feature, it no longer drains the battery, but on any of the previous generations, key left on will drain the battery. So you've done something though that pulls the battery down below voltage, and you don't have at least 9 volts to pre-charge the ECU. Well, this little starting capacitor will hold that. Instead of it being immediately sucked into the battery and not being available to the ECU, it sort of holds that and makes it available so that the ECU can see that voltage, wake up, and then start the motor. And so we add that on and we put it here. We like to bury it in this little subframe area. That's a good spot. As far as the battery goes, that's the anti-gravity 8-cell. It's the most amps that you can get into the 8-cell form factor that'll fit in a KTM battery box, and so we always upgrade those batteries. The stock Skyrich batteries have proven to be weak and less than reliable over the years. In here you can see the horn relocation. That's this little guy right down in there, and we talked about why we relocated there. On this ground strap, we put a longer bolt in and then a nut on the bottom. So many KTMs have issues with this grounding lug right here. Oh, and the other thing we do is we run a secondary ground, so from the battery negative up through the frame onto the other side of this coil ground right here, we run a secondary ground. And so we do two things. Again, we do two things to fail-safe out the ground. We throw a nut and a longer bolt on there, and then we run a secondary ground. And then we like to put the fan, the names of these ECU, or the relays rather, on here, just so you have them for context, in case you have a problem in the field. We put in additional fuses. There's enough room in here to sneak 2 extra fuses as in your spares, so you now have 4 spares. These vertical ones here are active, the side ones are your spares, and then here you have spares as well. And there's open connectors on the bottom of this, so these are subject to corrosion. You can pull that off, and then the bottoms of these relays are subject to corrosion, so all of that is good for the EXC-F spray. And then on the bottom of this starting relay, same thing, open connectors. I'll sort all that out later. So we corrosion prevent all of that. Down here, let's take a look inside of the airbox. So there's quite a bit going on that I can show you. On the air filter, we put in a twin air filter cage. The reason we do that is not because it's screenless. There's a lot of myths out there about running an air filter cage that does and does not have a screen. We'll have to do a standalone video that talks about that, but pure myth. So we don't run this because it doesn't have a cage. We run this because it's rigid. And these filters have there's a large diameter here, and we've seen in instances where the plastic one will have a slight bow to it, or you'll have a slight bow here in your air filter area, and because of that, then you don't have good sealing, and you might get some dust into the air filter and airbox area, which is catastrophic to your engine. So that is an upgrade that we do for that reason. We run PC Racing filter skins on all of our filters, and we oil them. And then we run this PC Racing filter skin base gasket here. So all of these things contribute to an absolute rock solid, Loctite air filter sealing area. And then this bike has had, because this is going to be a high performance bike, we pulled the intake reeds out. We sometimes will replace these to the European style round boot, and there's really no performance gain. That's another myth. So when we do it, we carefully remove the reeds, and we don't have any problem with that. But there are riders who will ask us if the upgrade, or let me just say the lateral move between the US style boot with a square intake over to the round style boot has any performance gains, and it does not. And so we never claim that it does. There's one thing, though, that you might want to consider. There have been people who, while they're removing their reeds here, will take a screwdriver or a pick or whatever, and they will poke a hole in their boot. And once that happens, now you've got trouble. You could seal it, I suppose. You could put some silicone on it to make it airtight, but I think for me, anyway, if I poked a hole in my air boot, I would replace it out. So just skipping over that and just doing the European style boot without the reeds and swapping the entire assembly out makes sense if you feel like you're not maybe confident enough in your mechanical abilities to remove that and not damage it. So that's that. Oh, and then there's one other thing to mention. We have heard where people will ask if it makes any performance difference to stuff a round velocity stack into your square American style air boot, and there's absolutely none. You can do your own research on velocity stacks. That's a real thing. There is such a performance concept or component called a velocity stack. But stuffing a circular tube into a square hole with all the side air gaps really is pointless. And then the myth that if you don't do that, then that the intake boot will collapse is categorically a myth as well. So tons of myths out there regarding intake systems. So maybe that dispels a little bit of that. And then up in here into the wiring, so we have a couple of things going on right here. So this is our Wi-Fi connector Wi-Fi module for the Get ECU, and then we make this little bracket right here that mounts that thing in there. And so here you can see this is where the tail light gets plugged into. Now the plastics aren't here, the tail light's not here. So this is the stock connector that would have connected to the stock light, and in series we put in a flasher module. What this does is this pulses the brake light so that when you tap the brake, it will strobe for 4, 5, 6 seconds and then go solid, just as a safety enhancement measure. So the new tidy tail light will plug into this, and that'll be for the tail light itself. And then what this assembly is, this is an auxiliary relay. This receives an on signal, a trigger signal from the ECU, and then once that fires, this is connected to the battery. It's independently fused. We provide a spare fuse, and then you have you have these two connectors here, which then are auxiliary connectors, and you can power anything off of this that you want to be engine run power only. So that could be like a GPS or a phone charger or heated grips, any of those types of features, and then you could run those wires back in here and tap into that. And these are toolless, so these take no crimps, no special tools, no special knowledge. You just pull up on this little tab. I've got oily hands from that air filter. I'm going to do my second finger here. So you pull up on this tab, and then you put in your stripped wires, and then you snap that down, and it's secured. And you can change that at any time without having to do any crimps. So when we put the tidy tail on, then we'll finish all this up and make all these connections and secure all this out of the way. This is now unused. This was to the stock OEM plate assembly, and that was to one of the running lights. That's to the turn signals, and the tidy tail will connect into that. So by the end of this, when you're done, you'll just end up, if you do a tidy tail, you'll just end up with this unused connector, and you can tuck that out of the way. So that's, I think, everything going on inside of the air box. Let's see here. The vapor dongle. So let's talk about some of the smog removal items for this Baja bike. There was a vapor recovery solenoid system that was right here. And so when that's removed, you end up with a connector, which we provide a dongle for. And this is just a jumper out dongle. It also prevents dust and mud from packing into the empty connector. And there have been instances where this thing will come down and could get trapped up and caught in the chain and rip itself out. So if you do this on your bike, you want to route it up along the frame, tuck it up high. You can just put it here on top of the air boot, zip tie it so it doesn't come down and dangle. This hose right here has a one-way check valve, and this is the crankcase vent hose that is now routed like one of the motocross bikes, that just comes out down there by the at the bottom by the skid plate through the swing arm, and it comes up and that connects to the vent port here on the top of the head. And because this is a beefy silicone hose that we provide, the stock band clamp, the little crimp clamp, it's not even crimp, it's just like a spring clamp. It doesn't fit, and so we just run a zip tie up there to hold that, and then this one-way check valve will prevent the very rare, however it has happened, the very, very rare instance where if you are, and I'll just briefly talk about that, if you are riding this bike and it has, so a motocross bike, this is really where this has happened and we've seen it before. So you're riding one of the competition bikes and this hose is just dangling down into the water. So the engine's hot, it's very hot, and you are in a river crossing and you happen to stop in the water. You've got water flash cooling the engine, and then that hose, that vent hose, is down in water. And so you've got all these forces sort of happening at once. You're rapidly cooling the engine, and then this is in water. And so now as the engine cools and things contract, the air inside contracts and it cools, that creates, cold air contracts. So this is the only way for ambient air pressure to equalize inside of the engine. And so it will draw, it could draw water up through the bottom of that hose, and it may get, who knows how high it's going to get, because the air volume in here is, again, it's contracting, so it's creating a vacuum, sucking water up into that hose, and it may come all the way into the engine, or it may come pretty high. And then when the engine is cranked, there's some positive pressure and some vacuum pressure that happens as the piston is going up and down within the empty chamber of the crankcase. And if you've got water just really high up there, it could burp some of that water into the engine, and you'll have water, and whatever the condition of that water, and in one instance we had a rider who was down here in southern Nevada, and our rivers often have sand in them. They're sandy rivers, and he gulped in some sandy water, and that eventually destroyed his engine. So a one-way check valve is a way to prevent that. You can also do an air gap, like a P-trap on this hose, and we probably need to create a little insert with the T out, and then a vapor bleed off, like a P-trap essentially, to break the vacuum so that doesn't happen. And so that's something we just saying this out loud makes me think we need to work on something like that. So look for that soon. Here you can see, we've talked about this on the other bike, just this, we put on screw clamps so that you're screwdriver ready if you ever needed to do any field service work on your injector and the hose and all of that. And then on the 350s, the clutch line happens to be really close to that clamp, and on the stock clamp, there have been times where we've seen the stock Oedeker clamp rub into this hose. And then if you switch out to a screw clamp, it definitely is close enough to rub into that hose. So we always throw a little piece of fuel line over that, and so that just prevents, whether it's stock or the aftermarket, like with a screw clamp, that will absolutely prevent that from happening. It's just a fail-safe thing you might want to consider doing on that. The also, as part of the GET system, the GET ECU ignores the O2 sensor, and so we provide this little dust dongle because this is now an open empty terminal, and that will just keep it from packing up with dirt and mud and water. And so that's just set up out of the way. Samco hoses, we looked at that. The thermostat, so here's another set of myths that removing a thermostat on a fuel injected bike has a benefit, a cooling benefit. It just doesn't. And then if you have taken this thermostat out, you may have running temps as you're running down the road. Your coolant temps may be down into the 120, 130, 140 range, and that is just insufficient for proper EFI tuning. And so you really need temperatures at least 190 degrees. That's what the ECU is ideally set up for. The stock ECU, aftermarket ECUs, all of that is really calibrated around 190 degree coolant temperature, and without a thermostat, you will very much likely be below that. The one exception would be is if you have a coolant, and there are racers that will do this, you have a temperature reading device, you have a thermometer, a digital thermometer on your bike, on your bars somewhere, and you're watching your coolant temps, and then there are racers who will then put a piece of cardboard in front of one of the radiators or their block-off radiators. You see semi-trucks doing this all the time in very cold temperatures to keep their coolant temps up. And so you could calibrate it or regulate it on your own, or just leave your thermostat in. That's probably a standalone video, just all the myths out there about thermostats. The Emperor radiator guards, we talked about that on the other bike. Here you can just see why we use these. They extend past the radiator, and so there's absolutely full radiator protection. None of the side of the radiator at all is exposed. None of the bottom is exposed. It's completely boxed in, and then it's got that double connection here. So if there was any doubt about what the ultimate radiator guards are, this is just evidence of that fact. And then maybe the X guard or the X mud, we talked about those, and you can see how they just cover. It's just a gaiter. It's a gaiter that covers your lower stanchions, the bottom of your fork legs, and keeps mud and debris out of there and prevents seal damage. So looking at my list here, that's probably it. We will throw the plastics on this bike, and that'll absolutely transform the look of this bike. They're a great design, great set of plastics, and we'll throw those on, and that will be the picture for the video. And then we will do our test ride. So we ride these bikes for 1 hour, break them in, do engine break in, change that oil, we give them the first oil change, and then we get these back to the customers. So again, these two bikes here are part of our Ultimate Taco Moto Dual Sport Adventure KTM build program. And if you wanted to participate in this or get one of these bikes lined up for yourself, you can reach out to us. We will leave all those methods to contact us in the notes below. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, go out, get some adventure.